All right. Good afternoon. I'm Vince DiGaetano. I'm currently at Fordham University. Um, I'm happy to be on with Coach today. You know, we had some conversations and we were looking at some different things to do. I've done a lot on tackling. Currently, I'm at Fordham. I'm a special teams quality control, but in the past, I've kind of brought a lot of different positions to like coaching. I've been a head coach at the D3 level. I've been a coordinator, position coach, different special teams coordinator. So I've held a lot of different positions over the last like 15, 20 years in college football. Started out in high school football too. So when we kind of discussed some stuff of like what we wanted to do, one of the things I wanted to really look closely at it is a compilation of things I put together with situational football. And reason I kind of go about this is because, we spend a lot of time at clinics. We spend a lot of time really kind of going over scheme-wise stuff, which is of most importance, developing rules, developing basis for different kind of language for everything. But, one of the things that ends up kind of taking place more than anything else is, the game's played in mostly in situations. And, there's a couple situations that we'll look at very closely today. Not to say these are the only situations. And most of what we're going to look at too is how you look to break them down, because playing against the opponent is one thing, but playing against the field is a whole nother story. Time, field, and space are three things that are pretty consistent in the game, regardless of what position that you're in. So my contact information is on the bottom, where you can just get me at Coach Dig if there's something that you like here or something you have a question about or something you want to add to be honest with you too, because I think we're always evolving and we're always learning in this too. But your perspective kind of changes. And I can tell you one thing that basically if you're, starting out as a position coach, if you're a coordinator, if you're a head coach, if you're an analyst, if whatever that you are, right? If you're a graduate assistant, like you're consistently looking to kind of get better, and whatever your position is, you got to be great at that position at that time. And it's all building out to one area that can go into fruition. So I'm just going to make this statement as we go, and there's a quote by Otto von Bismarck: "Fools say that they learn from experience. I prefer to profit from others' experience." So the reason I put that in there is that this is basically all about experience, right? This is all about experience when we look at this. I have everything that I've developed here is based off of one thing and one thing only, right? Mistakes, right? Mistakes that have been made during the course of a game, during the course of a season, that you come back in on a Sunday night, on a Monday morning, and you flip on the film and you look at and you make a note of and you say, like, how did we not win that one situation? How did we not win that time that's there? That's a big part of like everything that's been developed. And I could probably pinpoint everything that has been put on here, where it's been learned from, but it's probably been the majority of stuff that I'll go over has been learned from losing the situation, right? Or from reevaluating the situation to figure like, how can we do that actually better? Because what ends up happening a lot of times that I've through time that I've learned is, especially in critical positions, especially during the end of the game, is you're looking for some real big piece of information that you don't happen to have. And that becomes the biggest challenge that you have to look for at that moment in time, that split-second decision-making, when you don't have that piece of information and you don't know where to get from it. When you're asking on a headset, what is the range of the kicker? Or you're looking at, what do they do in a coming out situation? Or, what is this what's our matchup in this personnel grouping? Things like that, like are not answers that you can have on game day. So what happens is each of these things have become something that you can kind of look at way ahead of time, and you make it almost like a standard checklist. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to go over today is really going to help to formulate what more of like a breakdown and a checklist is going to look like going into it, rather than more of a game planning situation, just things to mark off as it goes. So, what I have up now is about the book Moneyball. So a lot of my coaching philosophy doesn't come from just football alone. It comes from Moneyball. So, as a young teacher in the Bronx back in the day, is take the train a lot. So you have an opportunity to read a lot more. And you start out with a lot of coach scheme, coach philosophy, and books like that. But during and being a Yankee fan at the early in the early 2000s, and with the popularity of the book, and still a Yankee fan now, but looking at Moneyball, it kind of debunked what it felt like to be the team that had a little bit less versus the team that had a little bit more. And when I first started out as a coordinator, I was at a school that was a military school, maritime college. And one of the things that was there was like, we had great kids, we had hardworking kids, but when it came to athleticism, you always didn't have a kid that matched up with the kid you were playing against. So what we had to figure out how to go ahead and manipulate the game to make it work for us. And really, Moneyball speaks to a lot of that too. And it really does a clear message of like defining what the game actually is. So when you look at like Billy Beane's philosophy on it about taking pitches and drawing walks and finding players that can do the things that his philosophy said that they can do, we had to kind of, not necessarily that carries over, specifically those traits carry over to what we're doing, but we had to spend a lot of time making sure that we looked at, first of all, what is it that our players do really, really well? And beyond what our players do really, really well, like defining what our game actually is, right? Baseball is an untimed game, and he speaks very specifically to that. Football is a timed game. Baseball has a different parameters to the field, right? Football is 100% the same thing to every field, right? To every field, to every parameter of it as well. So it's as much about playing against the clock. It's as much as about playing against the standard set of downs. It's as much as playing against the situation as it is everywhere else, and just creating the education for knowing so well. So what they did very well was they knew, they had to go ahead and take walks to get players on base, to get more time, to get more opportunities for a run. What we started to look at was we started to create about minimizing games, about breaking down smaller parts of the games, about educating our players on situational awareness. A lot of that comes down to, and I think it's manifested itself over the years, and people are doing a lot more of, opening drills, about understanding space and putting in situations. Yes, we all do our series of red zone, we do our series of coming out, but you start to ask yourself, how many times do you actually matriculate the ball up and down the field, right? How many times do you put yourself in the third down situations, and what does that script look like? So it's become more popularized, obviously, through the years, but within that, we try to take a deeper dive and really understanding the why as opposed to the how. One of the best coaches I've probably played for and speak to, as a young coach, I would speak to him and I'd always ask him a question. And he never answered the question. He always would ask me why I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. And that's really kind of like molded a little bit more of this too, as to asking yourself, why is it that you're doing the thing that you're doing? You watch coaches a lot of times, they draw a lot of lines and they, what do you think of this stunt? Well, like, what are you trying to do with that stunt? What are you really trying to accomplish? And then those things too. And that speaks to a little bit of the stuff we're going to look at today. So here's some of the situations that I'll touch on. We'll look at the coming out situation, looking at red zone, looking at third down, and looking at 2 minute. So these aren't obviously the only situation, but when you look at obviously coming out, you look at what teams are trying to accomplish and what you're trying to accomplish there. Territory is so much of what goes into the game. When you look at some of the legendary coaches, right? You look at Parcells, right? You look at Lombardi. You look at some of these areas. A lot of these people, their roots were in West Point, right? And if you read some of the biographies, they talk about like Red Blake, and they talk about how the emphasis on territory was so important, right? Back at the beginning. So it's always about knowing space, and it's about controlling of space, and it's controlling of area that's on the field. So the coming out, for an offense is so key, and then holding somebody down there and forcing, them to punt the ball and put yourself in a better field position for your offense for your offense is key. And obviously, statistically, it shows that the less area you have to go, the better chance you have of scoring. I mean, that's pretty much a pretty standard approach throughout all of football. And then obviously, being in the red zone is the most critical time from a defensive perspective as well. So I should have said at the beginning, I'm going to come through this from a defensive perspective. However, all of this information could be applied to an offensive perspective. I started to understand that when I did that as a defensive coach, once I was a head coach, and I understood that, like, you know, I had to be responsible for the offense too. So you look at some of that. And then obviously third down, getting off the field, obviously being key for third down, and then getting on the field, staying on the field and converting for the offense. And then probably, and then what I'm going to lead with is one of the more interesting ones that I always find, which is the 2-minute drill. And really, I look at this from a perspective of a 2-minute defense, but then, you know, it could be applied obviously to a 2-minute offense, because once I did go to the role of being responsible for all sides of the football, we were able to apply this over to the offense. And the key and we were very good in that. And then, you know, most teams work that their, you know, Wednesday, Thursday process, whatever the case may be. But it was most important because it was not looked at as this breakdown of what they did, you know, what teams do, as opposed to this looking very closely at managing the situation, like managing what the field did, what the capability was in that situation too. So as I go through it, it can be something that you look at from both sides, but from all sides of the football, which is included. And it's something that you can readily go over with your entire team, just to kind of have them understand space. And once they understand space, I think they get a better understanding of how to manage it. Okay, so I have this broken up into some areas. So when we talk about, I'm going to start you with 2-minute defense, and I'm coming from a defensive perspective, but this is just as easily applied to the offensive perspective. So let's consider this as the beginning of a drive, a 2-minute drive. Okay, so at the beginning of a 2-minute drive, if I'm coming out, right, I really have this field broken down into a couple areas. But before that even starts, if you look at the box in yellow, at the start of the drive, these are the things that you need to know, right? You obviously need to know the score of the game, right? And there's two types of 2-minute drives, if we really break it down to it, right? There's the end of the half 2-minute drive, and there's the end of the game 2-minute drive, right? So the end of the game 2-minute drive is obviously something where there's a specific need, like you either need to get to field goal range, or you need to score a touchdown. I mean, it's very specific, right? Whereas the end of the half is a whole different story, right? You want to come away with points, right? And it's very highly documented, and we'll even look at one of them too. New England Patriots have been very, very good, obviously, at being able to convert it for points at the end of the half, and then be able to get the ball in the second half and really have back-to-back drives and try to convert points. And, you know, for as successful as they've been, when you really look closely at it, one of the biggest things that they talk about is their ability to manufacture points, because just like they manufacture talent, and they've had some Hall of Fame caliber players and many all-pro caliber players, but one of the biggest things that they've done is being able to manufacture points, and they've been able to manufacture talent out of that points too. For every Hall of Famer, they probably have 10 guys that they've manufactured into a great position and made into a really viable threat on the field and a household name. So at the start of the drive, you're basically looking at this. You know, what's the score, which is obviously key, and sometimes that's understated, and we take it in perspective, like what is the actual score of the game at that time, and what do we actually need out of that? How much time is on the clock, right? So that's obviously one of the big components about how fast or how slow we're going to be able to go with this. Timeouts are critical, and then this is one of the learning processes for me, and I can specifically tell you exactly the game it was because, and we call this what the kicker's range and what hash they're having to. So as a former special teams coordinator and somebody who works on a special team side of the ball, you know, you're going to do your hit charts, you're going to do your breakdown, you're going to do your research. But it's so critical that at the beginning in warm-ups, that you're able to get a live assessment of what that kicker's range actually is during warm-ups, to be able to look at and say, like, what are you willing to give them? And what we kind of refer to that on is the the 2-minute goal line, right? So we talk about what's the 2-minute goal line. So you're willing to say, like, I'm going to let them get, not that I'm going to let them get, but I'm going to qualify the 17-yard line as a 2-minute goal line, right? They have to get to the 17-yard line to be in the kicker's range, or whatever that range may be, or the 23-yard line, because you have to take all of that into effect, because right away you're saying to yourself, it's based on the situation. If they need a field goal, or if it's the end of the half, you're basically saying, like, they're trying to play this as the goal line to get there, so I'm going to play this as the 2-minute goal line for them to get there. And then once they get there, if they get there, then obviously they're going to be conservative in how they're going to do that, and we'll get to that as we go. But these are just pieces of information you would know coming out, right? And then their favorite receiver is key. It's always key, but especially in 2 minutes, because you're probably going to go to that person. When push comes to shove, they're either going to design it, or there's going to be a comfort level for the quarterback that's under duress, that they're going to look for the person that they're most confident in. And then there's a key one too. What is their goal line sequence, right? So in the goal line sequence, you know that there's a couple things that are going to happen, right? You know that there's going to be a power run game that's in there somewhere. You know that there's going to end up being a play action in there somewhere, right? You know there's going to be a passing style personnel formation that's in there somewhere. There's probably going to be some form of a motion play in there, right? A perimeter motion play in there somewhere. And they're probably going to be nowadays, especially with the 2017 Philly special, there's probably going to be a trick play in there somewhere too, right? So you kind of think to yourself, what is the sequence that they look to go to? Because if I get caught in there, they're probably not going to, if I know this and I do get caught at the goal line, they're probably not going to have a lot of time to go ahead and call out plays. They're going to go back to what they're confident with and what's their sequence. And one of the reasons that this becomes so important is because, and why it becomes somewhat of a little bit of an infatuation for me, is that I became obsessed with, one, getting beat by it once or twice. But then the other thing is how quickly teams can get down the field in 2 minutes. In the half. Like, you could go the entire half, go back and forth, and they can really show not much success. And then all of a sudden there's this explosion where you turn around and they're there. So knowing that stuff at the start of the drive is definitely just coming out and saying to yourself, we're in 2 minutes. Let's go through this punch list. These are the things that we have that are in there. Good. Let me go. Boom. But, you can't find this out like with 2 minutes and 3 seconds on the clock going into that. Like, this is all stuff that you go into the game saying, I have this punch list and here we go, right? And I can remember we would have this stuff on call sheets, like most of the time, just as we'd have like the go for two, go for one, go for two chart, or whatever the case may be. So when you look at it, the first thing we look at is the blue boxes, right? Where when they're trying to come out, it's all about gain and stop, right? It's about gain and stop the clock. It's about conservation, right? It's about conservation of the clock. It's about conservation of timeouts, right? It's about trying to put us in a position. And what philosophically most defenses probably think to themselves in 2 minutes is, they say, don't give up a deep play. Don't give up a long ball, right? So we tend to play off a little bit more, right? And how you go with that information is there. But, you start to think about, you're going to probably look at, and depending on like levels, high school level, college level, and then obviously in the pro level where, everything's really in the middle of the field. But in high school level, when the hashes are a little bit wider, they're probably going to work themselves into the short side of the field, because that's probably the easiest way to go about this, right? It's probably get yourself into the short side of the field and be able to go ahead and throw the ball in there. And you see this more often than not, because we tend to say to the kid, you tend to say to our players, especially our skill players, especially our perimeter skill players, we say, just don't get beat deep, play off, play off, play off. And offenses realize that and they take advantage of that. So they look for just gain and stop, and they just try to conserve, and they just work themselves, matriculate up the field to put themselves in a position. Now, depending on time and depending on ability and depending on how aggressive you are, you may end up seeing some teams that try to take some riskier things where it comes back to the middle screen pass, right? When they start to get into middle screen. And a lot of times, and it's even some areas in there too, where they go into some perimeter screen and try to get out of bounds. But, if you can get yourself a first down, right, and hurry yourself back up to the ball, you may be able to sneak another play before some time even runs off the clock, because the clock will be held right at 2. So sometimes you will be able to get that too, especially because the soft spot usually ends up being in that middle of the field in there too, where people play off. So there's a potential, if you do show pressure, that they will get there too. But routinely, if you look at this, you're going to see universally this has happened too. Now, where a lot of this came up from was not just from it's happening, because you may get caught in a handful of 2-minute situations, right? Potentially. So you may not have a lot of opportunity to look at your own 2-minute situations. So why we play against this in the situation itself is through like just looking at and studying what every 2-minute situation is, right? And I think about 3 or 4 years ago, during the bowl season, is where this kind of started for me, was where I just watched every situation in 2 minutes, and there was just these overarching themes that happened in there too. And everybody kind of started out there, and it was all of a sudden, it just always seems to be the same thing, that everybody can just move down the field relatively quickly by struggling there. So we break the field up into basically 3 areas, right? This is the coming out area. When we look into the middle of the field, right, now I call that the logo area, right? From roughly about the 40 to 40, 35 to 35, like in that range in there, you're looking at the logo area there. This is kind of an interesting spot if you really look closely at it, okay? And based on what you open up is where the shot plays will happen. And this is kind of an area where we kind of are very reactionary as coaches, especially defensive coaches. We've just gotten hit with a couple of quick gain and stops, right? And all of a sudden we went from, the ball being at the 25 or 30 in their territory to being on the foot of like middle of the field in the logo, right? And when we talk about logo, obviously we're talking about the logo on the middle of the field. But when we look at it, we're like, and we start to get antsy, like, well, wait a second, I probably got to tighten down on the outside, but I better keep somebody over top, because again, I still have the same deal. I'm still thinking to myself, don't get beat deep, right? Don't get beat in isolation. Don't get beat, with their fastest receiver running down past there. So I start to tighten up, in essence, on my outside players, right? I start to go ahead and play my corners down tighter. I start to go ahead and start to take away easy access throws. I start to do things like that. And what I end up doing is opening up the middle of the field, right? And then what you find is that this is an area where most teams that are really effective in 2 minutes will do what I call chunk and hurry. So what they'll do is they'll be able to go ahead and throw deeper crossing routes, like into the middle of the field, that are pre-designed, especially with underneath routes, and they'll throw it for chunk yardage and hurry back up, because if they can gain 15 to 20 yards, they design it in a way and they rehearse it well enough, they're going to find a way for them to probably get back up on the football and either try to get something quick, or if they have to spike, and take the first down, they'll do it from there. But a lot of times they're going to try to get something quick and have a pre-designed something quick out of there, because they're not going to burn much time. Because remember, what they're contingent upon is this. They're contingent upon that the referee is going to make it all the way down, that's going to mark where the spot of the ball is going to end up being, and get the clock wound. And they're basically racing. They're counting on their athlete beating the referee down there to go ahead and get the ball set up and go. And they don't necessarily always have to try to go ahead and spike the ball in that situation. They may be able to line up and get back to a really fast quick gain and stop, try to get some yardage and put themselves into a situation where they can go. But one of the things that happens, especially based on the timeouts and the situation they have, is that they're able to still go ahead. These logo throws get them quickly on, these chunk plays get them on the doorstep of the red zone and potentially into like where they can go to field goal, and they can have a transition made right away into their offense. And we as defensive coaches, a lot of times, and I put this in a we because I'll probably never, ever not be a we with defensive coaches, but we put this in a we because we've just been shocked. And we're now not even thinking about red zone. We're just thinking about, again, don't get beat deep, right? And we're not thinking about anything else because we're saying, don't give up points, don't give up points, don't give up points, but they're tactically there. And you probably are in a position, if you haven't rehearsed it, where you can't relay all the information needed to your players on the field. And we got to a place a couple of years ago one of the places that I was at, where we would just call out, "Hey, you're in chunk and hurry right now," and now linebackers knew to get the appropriate depth. Don't bite underneath routes, right? It becomes a little bit of a rule breaker to some of their everyday rules, right? But they have to be reminded of what their field spacing actually is, in order to kind of adjust what their everyday drill kind of does. So this way, it doesn't just carry over into what they're robotically trained to do every day. Especially when it comes back to biting the cheese on an under route, or making a run read where like it's not necessarily that critical in that situation for them to make it like a downhill run read, or to hot their feet, or different spots too. And so that those become really, really critical times that they can understand. But them understanding how they can go ahead and position themselves, this is what ends up happening. They look to gain first downs, and whatever the case may play, and sneak some stuff in there right after this too. So we get back into the quick gain and stop, because you've probably just called either the same defense or whatever the zone safe defense is that you have, and you're probably going to go right back into what you had coming out to begin with, because you probably you don't have a plan for that as well, because it's a very critical time. So, and we'll get deeper into this. So then we get into the going in part of it, right? So we get into the going in part of it because now they've totally shifted gears, right? And what we find a lot of time when you talk to a lot of coaches, especially defensive coaches, the offense has a really good plan, and you're probably just trying to figure out how the heck did I get down there, and like everybody's saying like, everybody's trying to figure that out. And then in the same respect, like they've got a pretty good plan. So we look at this from going in and break the field up into this spot. Now, again, this goes back to depending on what you need and depending on how much time you have. One of the big thing about, we call this shot and center, right? So when they need a field goal, right? And I think that this goes back pretty standard. They're probably going to put their kicker in the best position that they want to, right? And that's where knowing their hash that they want is so key. But then also knowing like they want to get it as close to the hash or close to the middle of the field as possible to give them the best shot available. So when we talk about shot and center, right, we're talking about that they're probably going to look to center the ball, right? Or they're probably going to take a shot. And if you notice, I don't have any of the shots down in the middle of the field. A lot of those shots are going to be boundary style shots, like where they take shots. They're going to take shots into safe spaces into the boundary, right? So they usually look to go ahead and put an area where they're not going to throw the ball into the middle of the field. They're probably going to look to, they can do two things in that area: throw the ball up and out of bounds, hopefully, or they're going to probably draw some kind of a penalty because of where you are on the field. And I can remember exactly the game that kind of came up with the philosophy of this, because at the end of the game, we did get called for pass interference because somebody took a shot into the boundary. And as they were doing it, they were trying to center the ball. So philosophically, it kind of looks to a place where when you want to go ahead and design something, it's almost like I want to bring pressure from the field, right? And I want to play some really close coverage into the boundary. And that also includes versus backs too, because as the clear out happens, you don't want a back to become free and work himself there, because again, into the boundary, even if we do catch the ball, I can still conserve time if I just step out of bounds as well. So when we look at the shot and center concept, it really comes back to being able to go ahead and look into the boundary, right? And then look and take away them the ability to center the football, right? And by doing that, you look at like where they want to be on that hash is so key. So if they're stuck on their right hash and they want to be on their left hash, and you're bringing field side pressure, and they try to run the ball until they get to the other hash, you're probably going to bring pressure right into the teeth of what's going on. They're going to run the ball into that pressure. So that's probably going to be work in your favor, and then, as opposed to them trying, you trying to play close coverage or something like that, and, or bringing boundary side pressure, they're probably not going to do that into that side of it. And you're probably going to leave yourself somewhat vulnerable into there too. So again, these are not secrets of the game or anything, but these are just learning from experience more than anything else. And again, we start to look at the color coding kind of has a little bit of it too, because it's about safety, right? It's about, the orange for the chunk and hurry are a little bit more risky. Orange a little bit risky. And then when you start to look at they need a TD, and they really don't have timeouts. So, okay, now you start getting into like opening up the middle of the field and the chunk and spike, right? So now you're looking at trying to gain gain spots into that area, and then you're looking to go ahead and spike the football, right? And then especially if you need a TD, and then you look at the goal line sequence, which I just covered before, and what's that sequence going to be if they need a touchdown. And that becomes rooted into knowing that they're probably not going to go into what they're going to go to. And there's nothing more classic than watching, the prep for, and I bring them up again, the Patriots defense back in 2000 in the Super Bowl against in the 14 Super Bowl against the Seahawks. And you start to look and see, like, they kind of knew that when play action was going to come, right? And they knew that formation was going to come, and he's able to go ahead and manipulate what ends up happening there too. So speaking of which, and it is pretty interesting that I'm picking on the Patriots, being a New Yorker and probably not a big New England fan, but you got to admit when something's good. And obviously one of the best quarterbacks in the game is Tom Brady. So here's just a look at a 2-minute scenario. Okay, we kind of go through it as we go, and this was the television side of it too. Okay, from a couple of years back. So we start off the drive. Okay, and again, this is pretty much NFL being a little bit different because not working off the hash. But you start to see the casual nature of working through there. Okay, England has 3 timeouts. Cincinnati has 2. Now we start with the whole idea. Let's work. Quick gain and stop. Right? Trying to get out of bounds. Okay, we can't get out of bounds. Clock is winding. Okay. So we start looking. Okay, we're on the foot or really, here's the logo. So we're starting to look at the logo. We're still looking for range. We're still looking for quick gain and stop. Okay, there we go. Now there's quick gain and stop. We got our first down. Okay, so a couple things to notice here. Just going to pause it quick. A couple things to notice here. We got ourselves out of quick gain and stop relatively quickly. Things started at 2 minutes, and they've gotten themselves 45 seconds, and they've managed to go ahead and keep themselves in a position where they still have 3 timeouts. The other thing I want you to notice here, right, is they only scored 3 points in this game so far, right? They will win this game, not to spoiler, because it's probably a game from about 4 years ago, just looking it up. And I use this one as an example because they'll end up scoring 35 points in this game. They will score back-to-back in this half. Not to be a spoiler here, but I guess you figured it out. But not only that, they're going to score coming out of the half too, okay? But they only scored 3 points up to this point, so obviously, defensively, Cincinnati's doing a pretty good job. Okay, so now we're at the point where they're on their heels and they're looking, and not to pick on anybody at any kind of level, but that's how much field is behind them. Okay, so now we're looking at what we talked about before. What we talked about before was chunk and hurry, right? So we looked at chunk and hurry, and here we go. So now they went from being a little bit aggressive. They got hit with themselves in a couple of plays that were under. They got hit with some back out type plays. And pretty much they got to themselves where they're right on the logo. So now they're going to back off and the underneath stuff. And here we go. So time. And there's the chunk and hurry over the middle. Okay, we'll take a deeper look at that play right after we're done with the whole sequence. Excuse me. But now we've gotten to a point in time where now we're 106 and we're on the foot of the goal line. So, and there we go. That's a good picture of what the corner actually looks like because we got forced in that situation. And how did we get here? And now the corner's going to play underneath and try to guard against. And you've given one of the best an opportunity to throw the ball over the middle into a window where the linebacker should be sitting. So now we're at the foot of the goal line. Now we look at the sequence. Okay, so we're into the half, so we want to come away with points. So what we talked about was really we're in shot and center. Okay, so we can take any shot that's pretty much into our boundary as the offense, right? And then obviously we're going to spread it to the defense. So you look just by formation alone, the trip set into the field, okay, with the nub set into the boundary, is going to make them overplay that. It's just naturally going to make them overplay that. So, as a result, there you go. Score. Okay? And I'm going to just rewind this for a second to the beginning of the play. And again, you learn from everybody, but thing I want to pinpoint here is with the trip set, and probably everything you're thinking is you're saying to yourself, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Probably have some combination there, right? You probably have some form of a combination there you could probably gain some leverage on. Okay. You're in pretty decent shape because for the most part, you still have 1, 2, 3 over that, right? Over that to the nub side. But you look at one of the best in the game, right? It's never even a thought. He's looking directly into the boundary when you look at Brady. He never looks over to the other side of the field, right? So, and again, we're not all playing against Tom Brady, right? I get that. But when you look at it, you look at one of the best and how they control it, how they control a situation. It kind of speaks to, if you're really good at manipulating it, you kind of put them in a position to the Moneyball type of concept where you're able to say, like, I'm playing against the field, not just playing against the team and what they kind of do, right? So I just want to look closer at that one play. So we're going to look at the chunk and hurry play. And this is where I want to drive home the point about what we get, where we really lose a lot of 2-minute situations or potentially win 2-minute situations in there too. And again, this is not about plays necessarily. It's about situation. So we all have in our arsenal a way to prevent this, and we all have in our arsenal a way to make this happen. You know, we all have some form of play in here. So we're looking here. If you just look, this is that one play from the All 22 film, okay? And you look at the difference about what ends up happening with the linebackers and how they get kind of stuck. And you look and see where the field kind of opens with all the underneath routes that happen and where that window actually opened up inside. And all it really comes down to is that underneath backer who should be sitting in that hole gets drawn out by something, right? And all this underneath action, by rule, may have pulled him over, right? You start to say to yourself, well, we know he really likes number 87, the tight end, right? But those corners that weren't sitting there in the prior clip are now sitting down there. Why? Potentially because of gain and stop. Because gain and stop has just hit you 3 times in a row, right? And now you're thinking to yourself, I can't have this happen. I can't have this happen. So gain and stop has happened. And all of a sudden it's done enough to draw these 2 defenders out from there. And now I'm able to go ahead and smoothly take on chunk and hurry. Now it comes back to leverage and tackling, but probably venture to guess that just as smooth as that would have happened, like if he hadn't have gotten out of bounds and conserved the time, it would have been the same deal. So looking from the end zone camera, you start to look at the same thing we just saw before. But now you start to see, what is his field of vision? I'm 1 for 1, 1 for 1. If he stops and sits, I'm going to jump him. If he stops and sits, I'm going to jump him. And there it goes right there down the center of the field. There it goes. There is your chunk and hurry. He sees him the whole entire way. And you look and see, right? He's looking right through there. One of the best in the game is looking right through that receiver, into that receiver, and allowing him to come right open, anticipating that he is. And it's rehearsed, and it's right there in the middle of the field. And there's your chunk, and now your ability to hurry off of that and conserve time. But now it really becomes back to almost like boxing. It's punching and counterpunching, right? It's punching and counterpunching and just in 2 minute alone and defending it. So, putting it together, and this is one of the ways that I've done it for players in the past, is that we try to go ahead and just review this in terms of what a field looks like. And really have them understand, like in a field, this is what you're going to be dealing with, and then having them understand where that's going to take place, right? And this is obviously something that is just it always migrates. There's always a change to this game. That's what makes it great. So you start to look inside of how this changes each time. But in teaching the field, it teaches kind of like them understanding their surroundings, especially in a critical moment, in a specific time, and everything that kind of goes with that too. I get a little deeper into this one situation more than anything else. And one of the reasons I get deeper into the situation is really, I think, because it's really a direct correlation to points, which in our game is a direct correlation to wins and losses, right? There's so much that we do to get to that point, building a culture of a team, skills, the preparation that we do. But it's almost like looking at that final little piece, that little cherry on the top that can be the difference from a win and a loss. And really, those situations are things that basically are the things our kids deserve, right? They deserve based on all the other stuff that they do to be a team. So that's why I kind of spent a lot of time on that. I'll go a little bit quicker through some of these other situations. With this is kind of more of a checklist for me than anything else. And again, this is something you could just apply. I do it more from the defensive perspective, but it's more of a checklist as I go through to see, instead of trying to break down what they have, it's kind of subcategorizing what I feel that they do and what they feel that we look at there. So when we look at third down, first we always look at personnel. Really, for all these situations, we're going to look at personnel. Notice I did not go out in personnel for 2 minutes because of the rules, and obviously being able to get people on and off the field, and sub when they sub, and some of the things that people don't look at very close. So I didn't look very closely at personnel for that one, just because you're going to start the personnel and probably be in that personnel for the majority of it. If they do sub, you're going to sub when they sub, and all those rules that go with it too. But we look at personnel, just a basic list. The X on that is just extra personnels. If they start to look at stuff where they look extra tackles or whatever the case may be. So third down has a range, obviously, to it too. So a lot of people like the fun third downs, right? The fun third downs are the third and long from a defensive side. The fun third downs, I don't think there's any fun third down for the fun third down for offense, I guess, is the short yardage one, but I just assume they'd rather not even see third down if they don't have to. But basically, as a head coach, I'd rather not see third down on offense anyway. But the defensive one are the longer ones. But regardless, you have to look at the range that it's there, and I'll get to what we look at as a range too. But when I look at it, and this again, stuff that were compiled over the years, field position is key. What do they do when they're coming out? What do they do in logo, high red, low red? And I'll get into red zone stuff in a second too, and then the goal line where they do on third down too. And then that's where personnel becomes such a key too, into what they do. So looking a little bit there, again, more of a checklist than anything else. And then we look at closely, this is key, some stuff, and some of this stuff has actually been stuff we put together from this time off. But one, who's their best player like during that time? I mean, they're probably going to go to who they want to go to. Again, and you look at pass rush, and even in the run game, you look at who's their weakest offensive lineman. What does the back do in protection? That's a huge one, right? Do they release? Do they go to the three technique, away from the three technique? Whatever the case may be, however you're going to look at that. Part of this, too, really has to go back to not necessarily what they do on offense, but what I've learned through the years and what I've gotten to whittle this down. And I think more than anything else, and I was talking to Coach before about simplifying everything, it goes back to what do they do against stuff you're doing? And I'll get to that in a second, too. What's your best matchup? And this really goes back to what's your best matchup in the run game, what's your best matchup in the pass defense, what's your best matchup in pass rush, right? Is the QB a runner or a thrower? And here's a big one too. Pressure, especially when it comes to pressure, and especially comes into long situations and pressure. Does the hot throw go into the pressure or away from the pressure? So that's a big one to look at. So if they go ahead and ID that you're coming from, the quarterback's throwing arm, does he throw into that or does he throw away from that? That really helps with how you want to rotate your pressure, how you want to rotate your coverage, excuse me. And then protections. Obviously, you're going to look at third down, 5-man max, slides, RPOs, and if they RPO play action, how they do it, and their screen game in there too, which, middle screen, perimeter screen, back out screens, all that stuff that how it goes to, and how sophisticated they're going to do it too. So, again, these are all just real checklist type things for me as I go through it. But it's not necessarily, again, it goes in backs and looks like, what do they do? There's times you're going to find, depending on the level you're at, where they don't do any of it, right? Or maybe you really just find that you can't ID what they do with it. They don't have to do all of it. But that helps you kind of say, this is where I'm going to probably spend my time. And one side note with this too, if they're not doing it, you almost can look and see, where do they do this on normal downs? on first and second down, on things like that. So where they do this on normal downs, I may be able to bring it from too, because they may be able to come out somewhere. And then I'm going to get deeper into this, and I will credit Cody Alexander, who does a phenomenal job with a lot of his writing and breakdown too. Match quarters, Cody out in Texas. I kind of picked this up from watching some and reading some of his stuff. Is like not so much how they handle, but how they handle some of these looks. And you may not be necessarily in a bear look or a double A look, but if you walk backwards up, or if you do certain things, you are in a bear look, right? Or you are in an overload look if you walk people up. And you may look and see it may not be the exact look, but if you look at this from a perspective of just putting people into X's, and you kind of say, this is how I look at it. And again, I look at Cody's stuff because he gets deeper into this, really deep into this, but just a checklist of being able to say well, what do they do against each of these kind of looks that I have, right? And how do they deal with the protection, or all those things? Where does the hot throw go, or, how do they check a play, or whatever the case may be, or they motion to something. You're just basically looking. If you look at that from a perspective of on third down, especially in your pass rush situations or your pressure situations, what do they look at for here with just putting guys in X's and forgetting what they do? I think that is really helpful in kind of looking at it too, right? And then what we look at is, your own self-scout, and taken from some people that did it earlier in the year. You look, because, kind of short story on that is, we had a couple of years back where we had an overload look, and I used to say to the guy in the booth, and say, this goes back a couple of seasons ago when I was head coach, I said, what they do with the overload? Where'd the back go with the overload? And certain points in time, we had realized from our own self-scout, we hadn't brought the overload. We hadn't brought for anybody from the overload. So what happens was we'd say, what does the back do? And they say, well, you never even looked at him. I said, well, and we drew up on the sideline, and not really something I'm in favor of. We said, bring the overload. And we got home 2 or 3 times bringing the overload in the game because we had never brought it. And it was basically our own self-scout that kind of led us to go ahead and get home and get some pressure. And then you get to looks in what your disguises look like and what you're doing there. And then stats are key. I mean, because stats are there. And if you have access to stats at whatever level you're at, obviously at collegiate level, there's mandatory stats, high school's range, but whatever stats you could find and take on yourself, you kind of find how effective you actually are. And at the bottom, I have call matchups. So, who do you like versus who, right? And who do you like versus who in that spot? And it goes back to knowing who's the best receiver and the weakest lineman and all that other good stuff, and where the back goes. And if you can manipulate that's, I think, a big key. So like I said, that's more of a punch list than anything else for a situation. And people go with what they go with that too. But, when you look at the red zone too, and so here's another obviously critical situation. And again, we start with the personnel and kind of keep this for the high and low red zone, and where you kind of look at that from where you want to start that is kind of where you want to start that. But when it comes down to it, you're looking at 2 things. You're looking at run game and you're looking at pass game, right? So you're looking at run game and kind of qualifying again in a punch list. What do they do in these spots? 2-back power, counter, QB power, buck, trap, 1-back power, lead zone, inside zone, toss, divide, and jet. Basically what I funneled it down to for the most part for the red zone run game, right? And you look and see who does what effectively and where do they do it in spaces on the field. And I think that's helpful to you too, and just kind of breaking it down. And what got to a point doing over the years is, taking it into that one section, which may be, 25 to 14 or 20 to 14, 22 to 14, looking at it from there and then going 14 down, 13 down to the 3-yard line for the low red zone and kind of looking at what goes there. Where do they throttle down? And speaking to some coaches and looking at things through the years, and what we've done is, it may just be that you're not making a call that's different, but you may be changing a technique that's slightly different, or, you want to change the block scheme and you may want to change the shade from, an inside shade to an outside shade. And it may just change the perspective of what they're trying to accomplish or get done, or, what they lock onto or what they don't in the run game too. And in the pass game, kind of really simplify it because, I think we spent a little bit more time on the run game down there because the field's so much shorter. And you look at the pass game, it's whittled down because the field is shorter too. There's not as much area to work with. And you kind of qualify into these areas like what do they do for crosses and rubs, high lows, 3-level floods, spacing, isolation, double slant, and if they have to get to the sticks, just get to the sticks. Like what does that look like in the pass game for those little spots in there too, right? And again, some of that could be borrowed for the quick gain and stop we talked about before, but you look and see like if you whittle it down to really what you're looking at here, it almost becomes like a punch list and how you can create your own field spacing. But again, understanding like this is, and this almost becomes like a mix and match type of situation where it goes back to once you start to match up and go, well, in certain personnels, they only do this. In certain, you may find that as you connect the personnels to the run, you're going to say, okay, this is what they're kind of trying to get. They can only get to 2-back power when they got 2 backs, And again, how they manipulate 2 backs and how you qualify two backs is up to you. But they're only going to get the jet when they're in certain personnel. And then jet works off of this concept too. So if you start to marry the run game concepts with the pass game concept with the personnel, creates a better kind of situation for you understanding their red zone. And the goal line, keep it even simpler, right? Still always going to start with personnel. Personnel-wise, you're looking at bigs and smalls for the most part, right? And extra tackles and everything. But come back to this, right? Concepts. Unbalanced, right? Especially in the run game. Going to start with fitting gaps. Fitting gaps as close to the football as possible and working your way out, right? You watch and break down most of these people that are really effective on the goal line. It all starts with just being able to not give access. Don't give access to the thing closest to the football. So you look at, unbalanced 2-back, twins, empty, and then you start getting into diamonds, and then you start getting into your wider stuff, right? Your 2x2s, your 3x1s, your bunch, snugs, and your wildcat stuff too. And like as we've seen, like, and I use a lot of the pro analogies. I think during this like the time off we've had, quarantines and the pandemics, it's afforded us a lot of opportunities to look at stuff. You look at like what, Kansas City is doing, the Chiefs are doing down there too. And there's a lot of creativity that's happening down there. But what's happened is it's really fits into some of these subcategories when you really look at it too. And if you're fitting gaps, it'll probably be helpful too. So it's only going to come off of like the fit it first. And before we get into some of the other stuff, it's always about getting the thing as closest to the ball fit and then working your way out to it there. But I leave it unbalanced because if you can have an adjustment in the rule from unbalanced, it's going to help you tremendously because that's where you're going to probably see most of the stuff that happens. Even if it's not formationally unbalanced, it may just be unbalanced by design, like where it ends up happening, where you end up with 3 and 4 surface sides. Right? Excuse me, 4 and 5 surface sides that are outside of the norm. Sometimes 6 surface sides too, where you can always spend majority of your game planning time trying to see something you might never see. Where if you just kind of get rule bases, it's a little bit helpful too, right? And then coming out, and I'll close with coming out. Been an area of concern, obviously looking personnel first, but when we look at coming out, right? One of the big things I look at, right, we've gotten it down to is just concepts. Concepts are key in like coming out, right? When you're looking at concepts, because the field is now so limited and their objective is to do what? Really, when it comes down to it, the closer they are coming out and you break this field up from like the 0 to 10, is if I can get 2 first downs coming out, that's a win. Now I get into like my middle of the field, regular down type stuff, right? And then I can get into red zone. There's the matriculation of it from the field. So our objective defensively is obviously to force the ball out. So 2 first downs is really the equivalent, if you're coming out from close range. And again, working this is so key and understanding what's there. So we get really big into trying to defend like everything. But when you really think about it and you look closely, there are certain things that happen that they're trying to play as safe as possible with down there. And there's going to be always some kind of an extra gap play, right? Some teams get traditional, right? They get the one time they see themselves get under center or they see themselves getting to 2-back or a traditional fullback. They're just going to traditionally try to create an extra gap that's inside there, right? So we look at the coming out plays like, when they get under center and they do that type too. But, little things like when they're going to try to go ahead and use the yo or the y off and try to manipulate a gap, insert something like there to get an extra gap play. Because again, you may not be thinking that straight down fit and spill or box or play that's right down there, because you may be in that RPO world that's down there, but understand that like that just is enough to get them the 5 to 10 yards to get themselves out of there, right? So they're just trying to spring a gap. So what do they have in their offense? And you're probably not going to see them in there. So this is when we look at it, what is their extra gap plays that they have in their offense? Because you're probably not going to be able to break them down from coming out. But if you're able to go ahead and say, what are their extra gap plays and what do they run them out of? It's probably going to be helpful to go ahead and look at it coming out. QB read plays, and this is an interesting thing when it comes to QB read plays that you really, when you study it, you probably want to look at. They're going to probably look to have the Q keep as many times as possible. And if I watch a lot of them, depending on the athlete or the quarterback, they're going to probably keep as many times as possible because they're really not going to play too much with giving the ball and trying to make multiple reads. So, I kind of look at this about having somebody on the QB. And then there gets into the, right, max protect. There's really, when it comes down to it in the coming out phase, there's really an all or nothing philosophy in protection. It's really, I'm going to try to keep 7 or 8 in and try to get the ball down the field. And one or two things are going to happen, right? I'm going to either convert the ball, right? Their hope is, or I'm going to draw something, right? In space over there too. So basically, when you look at it, you're probably going to get those situations. You want to know, how do they get to max protection? Like, what are the ways they get to max protection? And then also, or it's an all or nothing play where it's, I'm going to try to make you defend everybody. Like true 7-on-7 summertimes, defend everybody. And the philosophy is somebody's going to come open quick, and I'm going to throw the ball to them and try to get some space down there too. So it's really an all or nothing philosophy. So the ball's going to either come out quick or it's going to come out slow, but realizing what are they going to do to go ahead and get that to happen. Again, with the back release type stuff. And again, that's really a 5-man protection we're looking at. Screen works off that too with the 5-man protection. And then we look at the shots and the seams, right? Where is a shot play? It's probably the shot plays are going to work off of the max protects, and the screens are going to work off the back releases pretty much, obviously. And then you look motions and matchups. Like, where do I get motion back and forth, right? To create a matchup. Okay. A little bit like if you're in man, trying to get perimeter plays, or if I'm going to try to get, I like this matchup where I've got the shot play on this corner, but I'm going to try to remove this overhang player, and I'm going to motion back and forth to ensure that I get that, in there too. And if I see them run with it, or I see them a safety rotate to it, or however they're going to do it, then I know I got what I need, and I'm going to take a shot. So it's motion to get the matchup kind of thing is what we look at too. So how do they motion to get matchups inside there, and then kind of like take it from that too. And then obviously you look at field position and you go, the 0 to 9 coming out, kind of look at one area on the field, and then 10 to 19. And the reason I have it, and then the 20 to 25 is a kind of a rough area. Those are kind of a bridge into the world of openers, especially with, where the ball is going to be placed, possibly on a touchback or something. So it's probably openers, which you're looking at too. So you kind of get an idea coming out, like not necessarily breaking that down, but looking at openers. And if you if you break these up into fields, you'll find a little bit more. But you look and see, like, the 0 to 9s are almost how do I open when I need 2 first downs? How do I open when I need 1 first down to really get out of there to go ahead and accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish of getting out of a situation up there too. So those are kind of some situations that I've kind of learned through the years. There are things that it's a collection of stuff. It's not necessarily 100% and it's constantly evolving and constantly changing, because you kind of look at it and say like, oh, okay, you learn from a mistake, you watch a game, and obviously we'll have a lot more opportunity to do that. Hopefully have an opportunity to do that this year. But like I said, a lot of it is not just from where I'm at now, but it's from where I've been probably over the last 20 years. And you kind of look and say, experience is the best teacher, and hopefully I save you some time from some of those hard experiences that you learn. But like I said, I'm open. My contact information is down at the bottom. I'm going to flip to the first screen here, Coach. My contact information is down at the bottom, and you're more than welcome to contact me if there's something I can do to ever help you out. If there's something that's here that you want to share, and it's not an issue. It's not not a hidden secret. It's just football. But like I said, hopefully it's something you can apply to what you're doing. So thanks a lot.